Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see people arrive here. We're just
Hello.
doing that. This is the funny bit where people are just coming in, but you've got to keep talking. So you just try and say nothing too particularly kind of groundbreaking or important, and then gradually people come in, and then we actually get on with the actual conversation. I just want to say welcome to everybody. If you've not been here before, well, I guess you've been on Zoom before and you're not really here, but if you've not been in the Talkaoke sessions before, it's worth saying it's a kind of free-form thing. We're just kind of like go from subject to subject. We've got a theme today, which is behind us here. You can't probably see it unless I duck down. How can the arts and cultural sector respond to the needs of, I'm going to guess, their communities? Could be your communities.
I think that's a very good guess, Mikey, actually.
Yeah. This is part 3. So there's a definite theme out there. We're going to just maybe get a little bit of a context for people. Just want to say hello to everybody. Another thing is, because there's going to be so many people on this call, if you can just practice the raised hand function, because obviously I can, those people that are on video, I can see you and hopefully see your raised hand, but if you're not, then it's always good to get the raised hand sign. Bablu's got it straight out of the box. Thank you, Bablu, for that one, just to demonstrate. But if other people would like to do that as well, that's the round of applause. That's something different. We're struggling actually with our with noises on our round of applause, but we can, if we do see a round of applause, we'll try. Oh, that's noisy.
Yeah. It's
so
very loud.
we're kind of, but we've got one raised hand. That's a good start. We've got a thumbs up as well, which is kind of, and again, sorry about the noise, but there is actually a raised hand as well. But any kind of thing like that, we're going to just come to you. So that's a good start. It's lovely to see you all here. I guess maybe we should have a little bit. I'm gonna say Guy. Is that Guy? We just had your video on. I had a little wave from you, so thanks for that. Simon has given us hands up as well. So I guess we should just crack on with this. People will join, I'm sure, as we go on, as with these first few minutes unfold. We were going to have a little intro. Thank you, Rick. We've got Rick visualizing some of the, I'm going to move this up the way as well, visualizing the conversation as we go on, and he's got a nice raised hands thing going on there, just to say, raise your hands. It's almost like a Baptist meeting here.
I will just say that, hello everybody, I'm Margot, but we are going live on Facebook. So we're going to be live on the People Speak Facebook, and you can find us on Rich Mix as well. And Selma, who's somewhere there in the crowd, she will be live tweeting. So anything we say, obviously nothing that we said so far, because it wasn't anything that contributes to that conversation, which is about the arts and culture sector and the community, and how does the first support the other. And there's been a lot of news this week as well, so I'm sure we're going to be touching on that as well. But yeah, just to let you know, we are going live on Facebook. So if you're happy for your face to be out there, great. If you're not so happy, maybe turn off your video, but we do love seeing you. So there's that. But yeah, we this is actually a third meeting now that we've done with Rich Mix, and so far we've had some really interesting chats happening on these channels, and you can find those chats back on our social media channels as well. And I think we are waiting a little bit on Judith, the CEO of Rich Mix, to come in and give us a little intro, but there may be a bit of a technical difficulty there. So Selma, do you want to just let us know whether we should wait a little bit more for Judith?
Yeah, if you just wait 2 minutes, that would be good.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, I mean, maybe in the meantime, I should just say those people that are, hang on. Those people that are watching on Facebook, please do type into the chat section if you've got anything to say. Also, though, if you're feeling, oh, I'm a little bit shy to actually say it on my mic, or my mic's not working, you can also use the chat function here on the Zoom to put your comments in, because we will read them out and we will try and weave that into the conversation. Maybe, I mean, just while we're waiting for Judith, maybe we could have a quick recap of what we talked about so far. Mm-hmm. Is that fair enough? Who wants to do the recap? Is it going to be me or is it going to be you? Margot, would you like to, are you happy to do it?
I'm happy to do it.
Okay, yeah.
I'm happy to do it. I mean, the conversation went really broad. I think one thing that dominated the conversation for a while is obviously the COVID, the pandemic. But last month we were kind of exploring, you know, what is happening with all the other big issues that are kind of going on in the background or foreground. Maybe they should be more in the foreground, and that's an issue of representation. Are we not talking about that anymore? Or indeed climate emergency? These things people felt have been swept under the carpet a little bit. So is there something we should bring back? Is it important? And we were talking about arts and culture. I mean, that kind of ever-developing role, and particularly now, art and culture as nearly like a revolutionary platform, a political platform. And even though that's always been the case, the theatre could, or, you know, performance, and broadly speaking, art and culture, they have that kind of function, or maybe of inciting, you know, people to do something, start a movement. But is that role a bit more prominent in that way, a bit more now? And also, we had a voice from Uganda talking about the arts as a thing. I think in the UK there was a feeling that people in the UK, they may be a little bit more really obsessed with funding. There's no funding, I can't make work. But in Uganda and many other places, art is part of our DNA. So is that true for us in the UK, in Europe? Or is this just another business thing that we can just get some money for and just do some really nice glossy job?
I guess you could say, do we need this 1.57 billion injection? Or could we just make do without it and just carry on?
Exactly. And freelancers, I mean, what are they complaining about? I mean, there's, you know, we've had voices about who actually makes up the art and culture sector, and is that kind of emphasis distributed evenly? And also actually, apropos of, you know, the situation, the venues, organizations, artists, freelancers, and the whole industry is finding themselves in, I mean, can there be a bit more resourcefulness? Can we share ideas a bit more in a constructive way? Can we share buildings? What can these buildings be for? Program, can we program differently if you're a programming venue? And audiences, can we share audiences, or is it just a competition who's got more, as ever? And yet again, we're coming back to the issue of digital exclusion and digital fatigue. I don't know how you guys feel about it. Are you digitally savvy now? Are you enjoying this, or are you digitally fatigued? I know which one I am, but it's I'm not gonna. It's not about me.
Well, it could be both.
It could be both. That's actually very true. And also, harking back to the chat about representation, who is not in the Zoom?
Yeah.
Who is missing, and why are they missing? And yeah, I think by and large, this kind of captures most of the things that were beautifully visualized by Rick. But again, today is a new slate. We can pick up on any of these conversations. We can start completely new ones, and anyone can kick us off at any point, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the great thing about the Talkaoke. It's kind of up to you where you want to take this. We, in a way, you know, it's very insightful, and it's surprising where the conversation goes. Like last week, the question of representation was really big, and that was something a little bit unexpected. So it's kind of up to you where you want to take it. There's still a couple of raised hands I can see in the Zoom. Are those raised hands, are these people that are wanting to kick it off with an initial question, observation, proposition,
I think so.
interjection? Simon, you've got your hand up. Are you wanting to kick this off, or are you just still practicing the raised hands?
I was still practicing. I'm very sure that be happy to kick something off in a couple of minutes, though. I'm just trying to work out how to take my hand down, though.
Oh, don't worry.
Okay, well, I can do it for you for now. But hello and welcome. Nice to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Bablu's quickly taken his hand down as well, I noticed, now that he's realised it puts him in the firing line. But we do need someone to kick this off. Who's going to kick us off with a response, an observation, a thought about last week's session? Anybody at all? Anyone want to start this conversation? Do we need this 1.57 billion? Is it going to go to the right people? These are some of the questions that I think are permeating in the air at the moment. Anyone want to start us off?
Wow. Yeah. Simon's back in.
Oh, you're back.
He
you're
may be
back
still
in
practicing.
again.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Let me just hang on a sec. Let me.
Away.
Simon.
So let's talk about this 1.57 billion. It's there. How much do we trust that it's new money? How much do we trust that it's not repurposed money?
Yeah.
How much do we trust that the earlier Arts Council announcement that National Lottery project funding would reopen in a couple of weeks, that this hasn't been repurposed as part of it, following Darren Henley's statement yesterday, which I thought was positive in the sense that he said it would focus on individuals and artists. But it does feel as though when we do those sums, you know, there might not actually be that much new money.
Yeah.
Greatly encouraged by Mark David saying that the Music Venue Trust actually believe there will be grants for small venues. But how should this be distributed?
Okay, well, before putting this out to the floor, as it were, I'm just want to. Normally, normally when someone asks a question like that, we've got this thing called turn the mirror, and we ask, the person that asked the question, what do they think? How should it be distributed? And you mentioned individual artists and the smaller venues. Is that how you feel that this money should go in that direction?
In as much as that money is for the arts rather than the heritage sector, I think Arts Council England did an extraordinary job actually in the first wave of emergency funding. I thought that they responded first to the non-portfolio sector, and I think that certainly in reach, I don't know about the balance in terms of value, but in terms of reach, I thought they did an exceptional job of trying to find ways of getting money to individuals and to non-funded organisations who, being project funded, aren't capable of building up reserves. So for me personally, I have quite a lot of trust in the kind of ethos of that, if not necessarily in the balance of the numbers and the proportionality of it, the geographic, demographic distribution of it. But I think that's as good as we've got. But I also think that the other issues, and this is my first time in one of your sessions. I really intended to do a lot more listening than talking. But I thank you for the summary of the previous two. I mean, I think this is a real opportunity to make the distribution contingent on driving some of the change, a lot of the change that we need to see. I think that within the sector, when I think of individuals who I know, there are some people who I think are absolutely brilliant and who will take the moral imperative case for their organisation to be a means of ensuring as fair distribution as possible of what will not be enough money, compared to the amount that's been cut from the sector since this government's been in. This is a drop in the ocean, But I have trust in that. But I think that beyond those individuals, I think there's an opportunity to force that to happen.
Yeah.
We live in a sector, as a much wiser person than me said in a Zoom that I was in the other day, that is largely governed by 19th century governance models trying to prepare a relevant cultural sector for the 21st century.
Yeah.
And it's about the change in those organizations that this is an opportunity to drive and pass on that imperative and report back on how well they have done in their reach.
Yeah. Well, Simon, I appreciate that you came in to listen, and that is, obviously really important, and it's what we want to happen. But someone's got to kick this off, and we do need to hear thoughts, and that's a great way, I think, to start this off. It's just a question now of what people want to latch onto, and somebody else has got to respond to this. Do we want to talk about here this question of this 19th century governance model. Do you agree with that statement? How do we move into the 21st century? Is this an opportunity for change? And Simon used the word trust, I think, 2 or 3 times there. Do we have the trust that we need to have? Mia, that was a thumbs up, but is there also, do you want to chime in at this point?
Yeah, hi.
Hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is my first time.
Welcome, thanks for being involved.
I think that in terms of financial funding for the arts, which is obviously what we're talking about, you guys have mentioned the certain sum that's been put aside, well, apparently, especially compared to what I've seen recently, compared to the amount of money that's being invested in the arts, kind of bringing it back up or supporting people who maybe have lost their jobs in the arts during this current time, compared to places like France, Germany, Italy, all of these places around the world, especially in Europe, but around the world, compared to their budgets, their government's budgets for art spending, it's ridiculous. It's really ridiculous to see how little has been put aside.
Yeah.
I would say from an economic perspective, considering how much of our economy depends on the arts, but I think it goes much more than that. I think that actually it's less talking about places like the Tate, even though as an art history student, I think I've been to the Tate more times than I can count, or the National Gallery, or art centres that already have so much funding and that are already relying so much on tourism. But when there's places like the National Theatre, who they've had to fire all of their front of house staff, and that's the National Theatre. When places like the National Theatre have to fire all of their employees, it just makes you think about like smaller businesses and individuals. Yeah. You know, because actually I think I missed the session last time when there was the guy from, I think it was Ethiopia, I think you mentioned, that was talking about how...
He was from Uganda.
Uganda, sorry, my mistake. And he was talking about how art doesn't have to be something that's always monetized and it's only produced under the duress or like for the reason of just making money. And it's not a form of, you know, there's a collective that I really like called the White Pube, which is like a pun on the white cube idea. Yeah. And they write a really, really interesting article about why I hate the white cube. And it's talking about how art sometimes by some people is turned into an idea of cryptocurrency or just a way, you know, she says a really good point. This is Gabriela de la Puente talking for the White Pube, talking about how the idea of a gallery, it's just a shop. It's become just a shop, and art, it's turning art into just a commodity and nothing. There's no value on art unless someone's willing to pay like, you know, millions of pounds for Damien Hirst just making a shark, you know. I think.
Yeah. So are we too much turning art into a commodity when it doesn't need to be a commodity?
Yeah, the money instead should be going to people. When you give art, like when you give people in the arts money, it's more about, you know, you produce art when your well-being is supported and you're being, you know, you're feeling supported and accepted. It's not just about giving money to what is essentially massive companies and corporations. Okay, so those big corporations don't necessarily need the money. Stephen, there's a round of applause there, but do you want to chime in there as well?
I will just very quickly say that Judith from Rich Mix, she's technical difficulties actually persisted, so she is going to be watching us on Facebook and contributing on Facebook, so big apologies, but she is here just listening. So
Judith, if you want to chime in on the chat, then obviously you're very welcome to do that. At the moment we're kind of talking about the relationship really between money and creativity. Does it have to be commodified, says Mia. Stephen, were you going to come in at that point?
Right, yeah. It's just a quick comment. That Uganda, very inspiring, saying that, you know, arts doesn't need to be monetized and artists do need to survive. So that might be an argument for some sort of universal basic income, at least. Yeah. That's all I have to say on that.
Okay, I mean, what do you think the model should be then? Do you think it should be just like, I'm an artist, therefore support me to be creative and support my basic needs, and then I would just come up with non-commodified creativity?
Well, the thing about universal basic income is it's non-specific, it's non-judgmental. It gives everyone that, so everyone can pursue whatever creative endeavor they want to.
Yeah.
You don't have to justify it. You don't have to apply for it.
Mm. So do you think that would be a better model in a way?
Well, I'm attracted to it. I'm not an economist. I've heard all sorts of counter arguments saying, oh, it causes inflation. I don't know about that. I've just thrown that up in the air.
Mm. Okay, so what do people think about this? Are we funding art in the right way? Could it be a kind of either, I mean, I know you didn't say this, Stephen, but it could just be a universal basic income for creative people, or it could be anybody at all. You could, I mean, it could just be a matter of just saying you're creative. So what do people think about that? Is that a right way, almost like a grassroots way of funding the arts, rather than a kind of top-down way that seems to be suggested from, I guess, the 19th century model that Simon was talking about? Any other perspective, any other point of view? Margot?
Yeah, I just wonder what people, what is the function of an artist? Is there one? Because now, it's nice. I mean, it's nice to think about our artists. They just express themselves, and hopefully, other people can, that other people's lives and experiences are reflected in it. Therefore, it's useful. But I think that so many artists and creatives are going to be like literally out of the jobs. So this kind of basic income. I mean, maybe it's about kind of retraining or using the artistry and creativity in the other jobs. So maybe it's not, maybe actually there is no escape from, a capitalist kind of like income-driven. I give you this, I need this back.
Transactional.
Transactional is the word I'm looking for, yeah. So I think, actually, I don't think anything's going to change. I think it's just going to be more, the successful artists, they're going to continue being successful because they've already made their connections. The struggling artists from working classes, from BAME backgrounds, they will continue to struggle, and it's going to be,
Same.
Although it is quite refreshing that the Michaela Cole, who made I May Destroy You, she rejected the Netflix deal for £1 million, pounds or dollars, to get, for them to get the rights to the series. So there is, maybe it's not all for sale. But I'm just saying, it's just going to be the same. It's all going to be a struggle.
Okay. I mean, where do we want to go with this? Is this still this 19th century model, this transactional model of art making? Anyone else want to chime in on this one? Any comments? Mia, you got a thumbs up. Let me just bring in Selma, because you've not said anything yet, Selma. I noticed you've got your hand up as well, Simon. So I'm trying to spread out this conversation. If you're feeling too shy to talk, then just put something in the chat. We've got our first comment in the chat, which is simply "love white pube" from Margot. But anyway, Selma, talk to me. What you got to say?
Hi, I'm
Hello.
from Phoenix. Yeah, and just to echo, Judith is listening in on Facebook and has been locked out of multiple Zoom accounts for some reason.
Okay. Has she been doing too much Zoom bombing? Is that what it is?
Probably.
Yeah, too many Zoom bombs.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? Oh, all I wanted to comment on was the fact that I've heard that project grants from Arts Council England will be reopening with a focus on process and training and professional development, and less or not at all a focus on output. And obviously project grants and Arts Council in itself is its own, things to be questioned, and kind of hierarchies and processes and all of that. But that seems like a positive move, I think, for project grants.
Okay, so it's going to be a bit more process-based. Simon, let me come back to you. You've got your hand up still.
Thanks. Yeah, and yes, I think that's good. I just fear that the project grants is going to be counted within the 1.57 billion, rather, and it is just keeping an eye on what is actually new money. I just wanted to say what I meant by this 19th century governance model. This is about the whole principle of charity and voluntary governance, and how it is inevitably elitist. Because if you have the capacity to be able to add value on the board of an organization to which you really do bring the skill levels required to be able to add a level of scrutiny to some of the fantastic and brilliant lead practitioners we have in these organizations, i.e., you're even more talented than them, then you must be in an extremely privileged position to be able to put in the time required for free. And this is the entire, and so this is why this is what I mean by the 19th century structure and how it doesn't work. And how we looking for a way in, and trust is all of this. It goes back to the idea of if there's going to be public money or philanthropic money, whatever it is, it's about actually commensurate payment at the top level as well for those who provide that expertise, and then it'll be much more representative. But otherwise, with all the best will in the world by many of the people who participate in it, they are very self-limiting and don't know what they don't know.
Okay. So in a way, you're saying the people that are on the boards of these things, they're working for free, actually paying them would actually make it less elitist in a way. You're muted there, Simon, so you're going to have to say that again.
Yeah, I think it would open up the opportunities for boards to have that representation. And until it works, you know, until it works top down as well as bottom up, you know, inclusivity and the change in representation, and to make these organizations look far more like their communities, you know, I've been on so many structures, I've either worked for them or been on those boards where brilliant people have come in and they've known they're there because they're being, you know, because they are there as someone trying to improve their statistics.
Yeah.
I've also had the privilege of working with some places where we've had brilliant and very, very diverse boards. And, you know, and I was recently showing, and one of the reasons I'm here today is because I was illustrating what a board needs to look like by clicking on the Rich Mix Trustees page and showing it to another organization.
Okay,
So
well, that's
compare yours to theirs, you know, and you need to look like that. And that's how I find myself here today, because I was looking for an example of where I thought governance was being done better.
Okay, so you're definitely getting the thumbs up from the Rich Mix people. But let's spread this out. I mean, there's loads of people on the call. If you're not happy just coming in and getting involved in this conversation, then just write something in the chat. But there's a lot of people here that are listening in. That's great. But, you know, we do also need your contributions to this as well. Could we remodel this? Is Simon's suggestion of, you know, getting more expertise in on the board, getting a more diverse board, is that going to help when it comes to these organizations? Is that the solution? Do you see it in a different way? Are you more excited by Stephen's idea of just universal basic income for artists or for everybody? Is that a better way to go, so that in a way you're kind of propping up the bottom of the artists, the ones, you know, that are maybe not surviving, and then the ones that are doing better will kind of work their own ways out to get to do better. Let's have some comments. Let's have some feedback from people. Tell me, what do you think? Are you struggling for cash as an artist? We certainly are, because we lost all of our bookings. We should be out doing festivals right now. I'm supposed to be in France at the Pete the Monkey festival, talking to French people about what but no, it's not happening. So obviously I'm struggling. Are you struggling? Tell us your story. Margot, what have you got to say?
I just wanted to say about something that you said, Simon, about the types of people who are on boards, kind of deciding, you know, being on boards and why they're there, and, you know, the type of elite that they're part of, that they're able to volunteer their time. I kind of wonder, you know, in terms of young people's work, I don't know, I think we may have some people on the chat here who do work with young people. Has that been any different, and where do you think the situation is going to go for the next generation of those arts practitioners? Because in a way, I think art started becoming like this conveyor belt. You do this internship if you can afford it, if you can afford not being paid, and then you gradually kind of get, admitted to like upper echelons of the arts and cultural managerial world. But I think, and are young people just going to miss out on the current situation? Because, I just don't know.
So what is this looking, what's it looking like for young people? You know, I'm no longer a young person, so in a way you and me, Margot, we're more established. But how do young people now get into the arts when things are so much contracted in terms of the art world? There's There's someone, Mia, you've put something into the chat. Thank you.
I think Mia is a young person. I'm just guessing.
Okay, well, let's just hear from, do you want to read that one out, Margot?
I can do, but
you're the one that can actually see.
Yeah. So Mia realized that I'm going to read in Mia's voice. So I realized I didn't have to say.
Are you doing Mia here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm trying my best. But Mia, obviously, I'm going to probably say it all wrong. So please chime in. Only wanted to highlight organizations such as the art collectives based in America, and the Black Artist Alliance, Gaudem, Polyester Zine, and other collectives based in the UK. These are examples of groups founded and funded by artists to ensure marginalized artists manage to stay afloat by giving them exposure, commissions, and micro grants. So it's talking about the distribution of who has the power to distribute money, to raise money, and to put it to.
But I mean, what I'm taking from that as well is that artists really need to get together and sort of organize themselves, and unity is strength in that sense, that if they can actually get together and like push for their own cause, then is that right, Mia? Do you want to come back in? Do you want to add to that, or are you happy with what we read out on the chat? Anything from you, Mia?
No, I thought that was read fine. I was just giving an example because Margot was talking about how it's kind of discouraging to see that like just the rich artists and successful artists will just continue to be rich and successful, and then they won't be I feel like the function of an artist is also social, and there's a responsibility to other artists to not only connect and inspire each other, but also bring each other up and help each other through troubling times.
So you're saying the responsibility of an artist is social? Can you say a bit more about that?
In some ways, yeah. I think so much of art that's been produced and so much of successful art has been to do with social issues, or to do with kind of issues that a lot of different people face in different ways. And I think if we ignore the artists who actually inspire us and influence us, then and that also includes ignoring them financially, because I think you can't just say, oh, I support artists if you're not supporting them financially, because ultimately, although I definitely think that art shouldn't be just for financial gain, I think people have to live, people have to survive, I think. Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for expanding on that. So what do people think? Is the work of an artist intrinsically social? Is there a social element to it? Is it about artists organizing? How many people on this chat are artists? And do you feel like you need to organize it for yourselves rather than letting these kind of boards and trusts and big institutions kind of do it for you? Margot, I'm going to come to you, but I just want to put it also out to those people that have not said anything yet, because once again, this is about you. Margot, go on.
I just think it's very easy to say like, oh, go and organize. I mean, we work, as you know, we work from Tower Hamlets, and all these different like application forms and things like that, and it's quite hard to get people like organized and to get them to jump the hoops so that some kind of artist administrator can process the request for funding or whatever. I think trying to kind of get buy-in from people is very important, and I think that's just something that is maybe not an art form itself, but it's about like building community. Sorry, I think that's my mic. Yeah, it's about building community, and I think that's really super important before we start talking about the arts. And I think if the arts venues and artists can play a role in connecting communities, that literally, I mean, London is so diverse. Like you just connect people on your street. I think we all need to take responsibility of being more involved in that, as opposed to sit here complaining about who's got who's distributing money or not. I mean.
Okay, but connecting people on the street doesn't actually sustain you financially, does it? I mean, because we do that all the time, don't we?
But I think it can. Yeah. It's about maybe working in a different way, because I mean, it really resonates with me. Of course, money is important, but it really resonates with me what was said in the last session, which was is the UK just obsessed with funding? And I think UK, in comparison to other countries, has a very, very easy And I think, you know,
Yeah.
we would,
Okay, do we want to follow like a model of no funding? There's lots of other countries that don't have such. I mean, I think it was Mia that said it at the beginning. The other country, was it you, Selma, that said other countries have had way more arts funding or emergency funding than the UK, but there's plenty of other countries that have had way less as well. So we're somewhere in the middle. I mean, do we need to really be, you know, to spend money on art? Does it actually help us make these connections with the local community? Let's have somebody that say something, please, that hasn't said anything yet. Oh, Kane, you've raised your hand. Welcome to the chat. Have you got a view on this?
and also there's some views from Facebook coming through.
Oh,
so
there's some stuff from. We'll come to
to
Facebook in a minute, and Will, hopefully you can read that out on Facebook in a minute. But Kane, let's hear from you first.
Yeah, I was trying to. So, I mean, I think the arts does need to be underlined by subsidy to one level, extent or another. Because, yeah, I mean, there's an illustration I'll post. I'll maybe come back to me on that. There's a really great wheel image thing that was created by Americans for the Arts, which just sort of shows how wide the impacts of the arts can be across life in terms of, you know, things like reducing, it's all those sort of, what you'd say, the sort of instrumental impacts of the arts, the social impact about opening up new perspectives, bringing people together at this moment in time, reducing isolation. So I think it does have a, you know, and targeted work with specific groups can obviously, you know, help people realize their creativity, enter into new industries, develop leadership skills. So all of these, what you say, are sort of, I guess, softer outcomes, more fuzzy outcomes, but that are really intrinsic to kind of healthy people and healthy communities. So I think there is a value there that does, I guess, has, you know, that has a cost benefit to the government in terms of, you know, reducing negative behaviours. I'm sort of explaining it poorly, but I think that there needs to be a balance of that subsidy.
Yeah,
is
so
really,
there are so many, it's hard to really kind of, you know, provide the real kind of like mechanistic sort of explanation, but there's so many things that, let's say, you know, like social goods that are actually coming from the arts that are really hard to kind of quantify, intangible in a way.
Yeah, and, you know, and that's obviously balanced alongside the pleasure that people get from just engaging with the arts and seeing different perspectives. Should I show you that wheel? I can.
Put it into the chat, and then maybe
put it into the chat, or should I? Can I share it on? Should I share my screen, or is that difficult?
Well, if it's right there, then maybe you could do it. Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's try it. Let's do it. Let's.
I just think it's really nice. Hold on. Let's see if it works.
I don't know.
Can you share your screen?
I don't know if you're allowed to share your screen.
I can send you. I'll put the link in the chat, and maybe
and then we'll share it from our side.
Yeah.
In the meantime, let's just go to Will and just get some, you know, find out what people are saying on Facebook.
We've had a couple of people chip in. Simon's saying, in his opinion, artists, we're talking about the role of artists, whether or not it's their role to sort of light up areas that are too dark or too sensitive to explore in other areas. And he said, was it Brecht who said it was entertainment's role to reinforce the status quo and art's role to question it? So getting quite deep on Facebook straight away on that one.
That's quite deep.
Right there. There's us pussyfooting around the subject.
Okay,
Judith jumped in as well, just to mention and say that they are also looking for ways and opportunities around this really terrible situation at Rich Mix at the moment. They've had to postpone lots of their live programmes, and it's left them with loads of spaces that can't be filled with their usual live performances. So I suppose Judith's question is, they'd like to hear about any ideas of people and how they could use those spaces as well in the meantime.
Yeah. Okay, so that's an interesting kind of put it out there. Okay,
I had no idea Judith was on Facebook, but there you go.
Yeah, well, just because she's not friends with you, it doesn't mean she's not on
Facebook. That is very
true. Okay, so there's a kind of proposition, and maybe we can explore that a little bit. How can we use Rich Mix spaces, Rich Mix kind of assets in a new way, as you know, programming has been somewhat curtailed for now, and there's some interesting ideas. Maybe, I mean, we've got some creative people here on the call, so hopefully they've got some ideas. Let's just have a look at this wheel. I know, Rick, you keep throwing it up there, but maybe you could even disappear me for a second, just so we can see the whole wheel. This is like, we're now cutting edge. Well, I'm gone. If you put me on gallery view, you can still see me on the second camera, but
you don't have to
I'm
look.
still here, but I'm gone from the screen. Hopefully people can see that. We don't even need to do a shared screen, do we? But that's too small for me to see, so I'm just gonna, hang on. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. To me,
you can click on any of those and it gives a little bit more information.
Okay. This is actually a bit similar to our other format we're developing, the Slice is Right, that we're going to be piloting later on. If you live in southeast London, and I know you do, Stephen, so maybe you want to join us later on, actually. We're doing pizza making under different political conditions, where you spin the wheel and get different political conditions that you have to make your pizza under. But anyway, that's a different project. I can't really, maybe you did send us a link, that's good, because I can't really see what all the different things are. They're all written a bit too small. But I take your word for it. Tradition and heritage, tokenism, does that say? No, tourism, sorry. Anyway, I think we get the idea. So thanks for throwing that into the chat. Where do we want to go with this? Do we want to talk about, well, how can we repurpose these arts venues in a way that kind of responds to, you know, the troubles that we're having now? How do we, where do we want to go with the art? What's our connection to the social? Do we want to, is that kind of understood enough? Are people appreciative enough of this thing that Kane mentioned, that the arts has this huge reach into so many different areas? Where do we want to go with this conversation? What do we want to talk about? It's up to you. Yep, go on, Margot.
I know that COVID is like quite a terrible thing for people gathering in large groups, but I think, you know, there's a lot of artists who have not had an opportunity to develop work because they've not had access to free rehearsal space. Maybe that's something that, you know, venues can do. But one of the things that people are kind of talking about on the street here in Aberfeldy, because we talk to them every month, probably more frequently, in an organised way every month, but in between times too. People are missing a neutral space where people can just meet and chat and be. And I think that's kind of, you know, that's quite potentially interesting proposition without an assigned agenda.
Well, that's an interesting point. I'm going to give you a... But I've got to be very sparing of those because we've got the sound wrong with that and it's making horrible noise, so I do apologise. But what about this idea, you know, do we even need to put any culture into the... It's a bit like when you're growing like a, you know, a bacteriological or fungal culture. You just start off with an empty, neutral space and let the culture develop by itself. So maybe we could actually be just having these spaces as neutral meeting spaces where simply different people can get together, obviously in a socially distanced manner. Is that the way ahead? Kane, you've got your hand up, then I'm going to come to you, Will. So Kane, have you got a response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that a lot of organisation where you know that the building's going to be shut for a period of time, I think there's something quite exciting about considering those spaces as meanwhile spaces. I think the hospitality industry has been quite good at doing that, of really repurposing their venues. I mean, but then it goes a bit further. Like I went past Bockwell Lido the other day, which they've sort of repurposed as a pizza place. I mean, it's not, you know, it's offering everyone's need for pizza, but it doesn't go beyond that. But they're, you know, I think of thinking of venues as meanwhile spaces is probably a really good point. And then going out and being proactive about maybe calls for ideas, a bit like what happened when they set up Brixton Village Market, when they sort of got Brixton Village Market back up on its feet about a decade ago. I think there's some really, in London specifically, there's some really good guidance available. I think specifically from the GLA, there's the Cultural Infrastructure Toolkit. So I think there's good guidance in terms of how you do that and how you go about that.
The Cultural Infrastructure Toolkit.
Yeah, I'm going to try and find that as well.
Yeah, just send us a link to that. That's new to me, I have to say. But then again, I get all my information from talks like this. So, I need people like you to kind of bring these things into the chat. So send us a link. Will had his hand up. Rosie, you've got your hand up. So I'm going to come to you first, actually. And then I'm going to go to Will because you've not said anything yet. So welcome, Rosie. Hello.
No, I haven't. Hi, I've just been sitting listening, trying to catch up. I think it's really interesting about what could spaces offer. And I think for me, especially down Roman Road, something which I've really noticed is that the idea store is closed, and that's just the local library. And there's a mass of people which literally use that space as kind of like an everyday gathering community venue almost. They're not reading books, they're just there chatting and sort of connecting with each other. Yeah. And it's interesting that now that's closed, they are still there, but instead they're just huddled on these two benches, all knee to knee with each other. So it's interesting thinking about can these big venues like Rich Mix, which has these huge spaces, could that be a way of providing a safe way for communities to re-meet each other again, to stop people sort of lingering on the street all day, all night in all conditions and not socially distancing because they literally can't.
Okay, so it can actually help with a bit of social distancing if you've got proper guidelines in place that maybe won't be there on the street. Is there anything we can do? We've got a hand up from Selma. Thank you, Rosie. Let me just come to Will because there's some things probably to throw in from the Facebook chat. Is that right?
Yeah, we've had a couple of comments in. Judith's come back in again saying you exactly nailed it on the head. It's the Rich Mix takeovers. What might they look like? So talking again about how they can share resources and spaces, things that have come up before. We've had a couple of suggestions actually. Simon's mentioned that education might be the way forward, using these spaces to get more young people involved in the arts at the moment. Yeah. Not sure quite what that might look like, but we've had a lot of links to streaming at the moment, so things talking about statues as well, so almost going through a virtual tour of the physical spaces opposed to being there, right? And using pubs as sort of live streaming venues for gigs at the moment as well. So it's more that idea of trying to use those spaces without the audiences and use them in a more virtual way, it seems, at the moment.
Okay, so that's interesting. So instead of the pub showing the Premier League, maybe it could show what should have happened at Rich Mix.
Yeah, maybe.
So that's an interesting idea. It's great, the creativity coming through here. Selma, what are you going to say?
I just wanted to say that Rosie's idea is really brilliant, but also for me, it shows that there's a need. If that group of people are meeting up in the same space or outside, as opposed to being inside, and they still value that space and need that space, then that is the case for there needs to be a space for them. And whilst echoing what Judith said again, but whilst we don't have live performances, we've got the stage that can be easily transformed into a socially distant, whether we have cultural events in there or not, could be a space for those either spill out from other places that can no longer contain as many people at a distance, or a whole new space in itself as a kind of like community resource. So it's just really interesting to hear Rosie say that, because that's really do you think that will be a permanent change, or do you think it'll just be a stage that you're going through? Well, it's again what Kane. Oh, sorry, I missed.
Sorry, I had to do it. But go on. No, go. Just
no. It's kind of what Kane said as well. It's that idea of meanwhile, and also what can we learn from meanwhile spaces that aren't just filling a gap, but actually support our thinking in the long term about what Rich Mix will be in the long term, or what venues need to be in the long term as well. So I think it's a really good learning opportunity as well. But I just found that really, really interesting.
I mean, that is the thing, is like, you know, they say perception begins where habit ends, and it's certainly, everything's been thrown up in the air. So we're all learning every day at the moment, because we're just having to continually reconfigure it. Even doing this is different every time. So we are, obviously it's a learning, and we'll continue to learn through this. So where do we want to go with this conversation? Is it is this a meanwhile? But is it a meanwhile back to where we were before? Is it meanwhile to something else? What do people think about some of these ideas, such as performance in the pub? Are we then getting into different audiences' faces by taking Rich Mix to the pub? And which pubs would Rich Mix want to go to, or other theatres? Because there's been a lot of, one of the things, there's been a lot of chat about the relative funding for sports versus the arts, and how the arts have got this greater reach, but not in the pub. I don't think they have. Okay, where are we going to go with this? Simon, you've got a point down here. Thank you for raising your hand.
Unmute.
Yeah, just want to unmute. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think the streaming from the pub thing might be a slight confusion. I referred to a venue that actually has a name that's very much like a pub, but actually isn't. It is a kind of it is almost the kind of Manchester's equivalent to Rich Mix, I suppose, which is Band on the Wall. And I think that's a really interesting space. It is a really well community orientated venue and a fantastic program. But looking at those streaming models, I've watched a heck of a lot of content online since this all started. And really interestingly to me, some of the bands that got it right early on were not from the UK. The band I thought got it most right actually are sort of based all over bits of former Yugoslavia, and that's a band called Dubioza Collective, who are in different, and they were coming together to perform as live. They do all the content themselves, and they realized that the only way they were going to survive was off streaming income. And they put together a brilliant show every Monday night with international collaborations and all kinds of stuff. And it's so much fun. And that when I reflect on when I've felt most like I've been in the live experience during lockdown, and until this last 2 or 3 days, I literally hadn't left the house for nearly 4 months. So I was getting all of my content online, from symphony orchestras through to ska punk gigs, and that was one that worked. The other things that sort of worked for me were actually not in the usual venues. That lack of audience, the things that I found as powerful as live experience were often great artists because you don't get the audience response. So they were responding to really interesting architectural spaces. There was the name of the series, I can't remember. It's but it came from Dublin anyway. Fantastic. The Other Voices series of performances from Dublin were in beautiful space, really well done. And another one, back to Bosnia. I spent some time in Bosnia, so it matters to me. But for Europe Day, funded by the Swedish government, this incredible film of Amira Medunjanin and Bosko Jovic on guitar in the Sarajevo City Hall, that former National Library that 25, 26 years ago, was burnt to the ground by fascism. And here it is with this incredibly moving performance. No audience, the silence was incredible, but the film of that, if you get to see it. Now, I got the same kind of goosebumps from seeing these things as I get at a live performance. That doesn't happen very often. And just to say, I'm in a very privileged position that I'm working at the moment a little bit, but I'm working, thank God. I got on a project which is actually about designing a future venue. And I've been having lots of conversations lately, many conversations about where are we going to be in 5 to 10 years time, and trying to get through the suspension of disbelief that, that we're going to get back to some kind of normality of attendance at some kind of level, at some kind of occupancy, at some kind of distance. And also trying to think how much we can look at that kind of model of how venues work and how the digital will fit into that. And that's really, really fascinating. So I find that, and I'm really seeing that people are prepared to engage with events in the digital at some level. And I still think we'll be reaching, I actually think we'll be reaching bigger audiences, but just not all of them present.
I mean, we talked a lot in the last session about this hybrid model and the way, how that's going to work. I mean, I'm wondering, just from your sort of Balkan experience, whether the kind of turbulence of the last 30 years in that area has actually led them to be more creative about venues and about how they produce.
Well, I was, okay, I had the privilege, as I now think of it, of being there during that time and helping produce festivals during the war in unlikely spaces. So the determination of the cultural sector there without funding, and, you know, and careful what you wish for, you know, the funding inevitably has problems, but where there isn't any, what you see is actually kind of either political patronage or really, really nasty corporations as being the only source of funding. You know, Heineken were the major sponsors of funding for the arts in Bosnia around the end of the war, certainly in the relevant arts anyway. The state funding was limited very much to things like the Philharmonia. And, you know, and that comes with an entirely different downside. I may have spent some time slagging off our 19th century models, but I still think their heart comes from the right place, whereas I'm not absolutely convinced that the shareholders of Heineken's does.
Okay, so there's a 20th century model of corporate funding that are also thrown into the mix. Rosie, you've got your hand up. I just want to put it, just before I go to Rosie, people out there, whoops, bash the microphone. People out there, come and talk to me. We'd love to hear what you've got to say. I know there's some regulars here as well that normally got something to say, so let's hear from you as well. Also, new people, we want to hear from you. Is this conversation going down the right track in the way we're talking about creativity and venues and being not necessarily about being creative with the form, and are we going to help Simon design the venue of the future by giving him some insight? Rosie, what's your point?
I just want to talk about how, thinking about like how we're going to go forward and are we going to keep being digital. When we all suddenly went digital, I thought back to it still runs NT Live, and how that was such a massive thing. And what was so, I think the reason why that was good and that it got a big audience is because it was like this feeling of like collective viewing. And that, you know, you still went to a cinema, so you kind of still went to a venue, but that it was a live stream of a piece of theatre. But it was that feeling of that you actually were with, you know, loads of other schools or loads of other colleges or watching the same thing. So I wonder, as much as I think there will be an element of digital that continues in the arts, I do wonder if, I know we've already talked about this in previous weeks, but if we're all a bit zoomed out, like, you know, have we lost that kind of that buzz of all watching something at the same time? I just wonder how that will work. But yeah, I think it's, for me, I find it really interesting thinking about NT Live and how they you know, the National Theatre was doing it ages ago.
Rosie, you weren't here in the first one where we had sort of people from all around the UK, and there were some people from, I think it's from Folkestone or somewhere like that, were like, why can't NT Live actually sort of channel stuff from regional theatres through its huge portal? So it's almost like a reverse of like this kind of national monolith institution, you know, and actually you're starting to see theatre from more diverse places. So that was, I'm just saying that because it just reminded me of some of the conversation that we've had already about this idea of streaming theatre. But also I'm going to pick up on, just highlight to everybody else, this sense of being with other people. And it's one of the things we're working on in terms of our platform. How do we really get that more sense of being together with other people rather than just on a grid like we are here with the Zoom? But so great comment. I'm just going to go to Will and then to Kane. Will, what are you saying?
I just wanted to chuck out a comment from Judith that sort of paired in quite nicely, but apologies to Simon, I got it wrong on the project there. I think there's a bit of digital fatigue setting in that we mentioned earlier. But no, I'm going to read it. Judy said, it is about meanwhile projects, but it's also about embedding learning, outreach and participation in the delivery of our cultural programme, ensuring that we're widening our representation of artists on stage. It is a massive opportunity for us. Yes, it needs funding, but it's a powerful argument. So I thought it tied in quite nicely, and just to get people's thoughts on that.
I mean, it is, you know, like we always say that people speak, we learn when it goes wrong. And it's gone wrong for the whole world at the moment. And so we're all really, really learning so much. And maybe we could extend that learning through some of these programs and, all learn from each other. Kane, what's your point?
Oh, I just wanted to agree with, it was just sort of, I would have done the applause thing.
Okay, well, we can do that, sorry.
Do the applause thing.
I've had to keep it quiet at the moment because... apparently.
But I was just I just wanted to agree with your point, Mikey. I think there is that idea of how do you reverse some of the, or invert some of these already quite successful platforms, like that question about, it's really great that the National is doing so well with NT Live, but how do you showcase smaller or regional organizations? How do you bring their performances into London cinemas or into London venues?
So you like that idea, and that could possibly be a way, things could be really mixed up, could be really shuffled in a way, couldn't they?
Yeah, I think you can be, there's thinking about that across the stream of that, especially as we're looking into things like, as it seems like the government's pushing more in terms of potential outdoor performances.
Yeah.
Of how do you change that dynamic, that it's only really the really big organizations that are kind of gaining the profile around that.
Okay. Oh, Joanne, welcome to the chat. Thank you for raising your hand. What have you got to say? Oops, you got to unmute yourself though. Hang on, was that me? Try it now. Oh no. Yeah.
I think we both did it, but yes. Okay. Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. I've been thinking a lot about kind of the unique time we're in too, in terms of pressure that we can put on large organizations to kind of finally open their doors, because I think we're starting to see, people pay a bit more attention to, we've been talking about that for years and years and years, right? In every country, I think, saying, wait, why do they get the funding when they don't represent me? So I've been seeing a little bit of that kind of opening up, and I'm just curious to see what people think about this moment, and whether there will be some change in it not being kind of us against them.
In your mind, how would you see that opening up work and sort of actually, I don't know if this is Heineken, penetrate the parts that other cultural organizations can't reach?
Well, I think one thing, that idea that, people don't just give over power, you have to find other ways to get in there. But I think honestly, some of it would be exposing how difficult it is for people of color, for women, for disabled artists to get their work on. I just think people are listening maybe a bit more. That might be totally not true, but I think it's kind of using whatever platforms we have to try and raise awareness about our amazing projects.
Just dwell on that point for a second about the power, and those have got the power, like, I guess we're talking about the NT just because, they're doing good things with their power as well, but that power isn't just given away for free. It's kind, has to be wrested by those with less power, and there's a power struggle. Now's a kind of, in a way, a kind of interval moment where that might be an easier thing to do, or might be a more, beneficial, or whatever the word is, expedient time to actually redistribute that power a little bit. And what could that look like, really?
Yeah, and on the more kind of maybe positive side too, I remember reading yesterday there's a group of people working on sharing stories on Broadway about how terrible the statistics are for people of color, and especially Black women. The focus they're getting stories from people, and it's also kind of showing appetite, right? Because for years people have been told, oh no, I can't do your play on Broadway with the Black female lead. No one would be interested in that. So it's kind of also showing that that we're interested in those kind of works. I think it's probably, there's been some improvement in that.
Just going back to a sort of earlier conversation about how culture's tied up with money, if we're kind of through this period kind of delinking culture and money, does it allow those less kind of empowered people to actually have that voice, or have more of a voice because it's not about getting bums on seats, or just a question, really? And it's a bit of a rubbish question because it's just a yes or no. But anyway, that goes out to everybody. Kane, you've got your hand up. Thank you very much. What's your point?
Yeah, I think the really important thing at this moment, just leading on from Jan's point, is to make sure that we don't replicate or bring back the same mistakes in terms of creating barriers into engagement with the arts. I have quite a few friends who are disabled artists and theatre makers, and it's just the little things of things not being subtitled, difficulties in engaging with Zoom just as a platform if you are a neurodiverse person, to then more practical things of suddenly there's no publicly available toilets around that just reinforce barriers that maybe the sector was starting to pull away and society was starting to pull away.
Well, thanks for giving us some examples of those barriers, and maybe we could explore that a little bit more. One of the things, again, I'm going to go back to a previous chat, just because this is kind of like an ongoing saga, and we talked about the digital being a barrier as well to certain demographics. And it's something that actually we heard from Aberfeldy Live, which is our own little talk that we do here in the community about how older people really appreciate the theatre and need it, but they struggle to get onto these digital platforms. So, what do people think about the barriers? We talked about barriers in terms of accessibility for disabled people. Are there other barriers? Are there new barriers now? Is it almost like a reshifting of barriers, just as it's a reshifting of venues? What do people think? Margot?
I think from the point of view of being an artist, I think what was said earlier about, currently it's not about bums on seats, it's about kind of like survival in a way. So it's a slightly different thing. I think there's an opportunity for people and for artists to think about what's really important, as opposed to, because I think before COVID, it was just impossible to be making work just for sake of making work, or because it connects with some people. It had to be absolutely, monetized, had to sell the show and sell the kind of package of outreach activities and stuff, which is quite a lot, really. So I think actually the current situation opens up those, possibility of thinking differently about creating work, and it kind of adds different pressures, new pressures, or kind of highlights existing pressures, different ones, but it takes away pressure from the creative pressure. And I think it's a good moment to actually reconnect with, what is there an appetite for, which is what Joanna was saying about, who do we want to see in theatres? That conversation is a little bit paused. The conversation about everything else is slightly paused. So maybe it is time to think about representation in a slightly different way. Maybe we were getting just a little bit too stuck. Please bring in this community to do their show, so they can bring their ticket buyers. So then we're doing the diversity thing. Maybe that's no longer the case. Maybe now it's changing, which I'm actually welcoming with open arms.
Okay. How would you like to see it change in a way that would be more? Is it just about being more diverse? Do you still need to sort of guarantee you're going to bring in an audience when you're a diverse performer?
I think audience is really good, but I think I think it's now time for for people to say a little bit what they want to see, how they want to see spaces being animated, and it's about artists maybe using that as a bit more in how they make work. Actually, I don't want to be prescriptive about how should artists make work. That's artists' individual matter, their process. It's their process. But there could be more
diversity in their approach.
Yeah, because my problem with West End, for instance, which is again something that came up in our Aberfeldy Live sessions, this older lady was saying, she loves musicals, and she really is missing the fact that there is nobody here now in this area to take her to theatre. So I did have a chat about how she can connect with venues like Rich Mix, you know, just shouting out about what she wants, and maybe something can be arranged. My problem with West End is that, you know, all of this culture, I think as arts and cultural managers and established artists, we are dictating the general taste of the general public, and you know, and the types of people that we see appearing on TV or in theatre or indeed in management of venues and things like that. So I think it's important to change that, and I think
is it dictating or is it curating? That's my question.
Why is it not the same thing?
I don't know. Is dictating the same as curating? There's the visual for Rick to get on with. Selma.
My point was on accessibility, but just on curating. Apparently, the word curate was one of the most hated words of last year.
Really?
Because of how people use it so widely.
So much hate for the curator.
They, you know, curating Instagram lists and curating. But no, my point was on accessibility because what Kane mentioned, we were talking about how we run the venue in a socially distanced fashion, and we're already, you know, a lot of the way there. But somebody brought up the point about masks not being accessible for people who lip read, and I think it's always the case in point that if you don't, you've got to always allow for time to learn, for improvements, but also for consulting with the people who you most want to include, and who, or at least allowing that feedback loop so that, you know, you can be brought up and said, you know, at the time when straws, for example, were being banned, and there was a huge disabled community saying, well, that's not accessible for us. And I think it's just important that we consider access going forwards, and we don't let, like Kane said, don't let those barriers creep back in as much as possible.
Okay, but I mean, isn't it sometimes the case that with one, when you shift the barrier, like for example, I mean, once again, first conversation we had, people were saying, for me, actually, accessibility is improved by being digital because I live very far away, or I have difficulty getting out of the house. So it may have been actually in a different session.
Yeah.
So in that sense, access, but to other people, you know, well, for example, we're doing a visually impaired session on a Monday, but we're having other challenges about how to make it more audio and less visual. So, you know, it's like, all I'm saying is when you sort of change the barriers, you kind of, unintentionally put up other barriers. And it's, I'm not saying that it's, you know, it's quid pro quo, but I guess you've always got to think about the barriers that you're creating by changing the formats as well as the barriers you're taking down.
Yeah, you can't be accessible to all, but you can be really clear about what access provisions you have and how people can interact with you, and as much as possible listen to people and try and provide alternatives, you know, where possible. And I think it's just that clarity and like you know, being really clear about what you can what your building has, or what your product has, or what your offer has, and what
so it's about understanding that dynamic, and actually I certainly believe that it's not really about my opinion, but that you can actually design a better way. And maybe we could go to Simon with his venue of the future and ask that question about accessibility as well. Is there, you know, are there ways to make it as accessible as possible? You know, is it you win some, you lose some? We've also got a couple of new people that have joined in later on. Get involved in the conversation right now. We're kind of talking about really this moment of pause, of reflection, of change, where, you know, the power of the big institutions isn't actually as strongly held. And is it time, what kind of changes do we want to see in culture, in theatre, in the arts, whilst this kind of transition period is happening? That's really what we're talking about now, and currently really about accessibility. How can we make it more accessible, or think more, at least, about accessibility? Kane, you got a point.
Yeah, I just think it's, you can't necessarily make everything accessible to everyone, but I think there's also a need to at least identify that and to work to, well, it's working to just make sure that you are thinking about who isn't in the room and therefore how you bring them in the room, and really, you know, I think go for any organization or venue, just if you're not, if those people aren't involved, you know, those people with lived experience in the creation of your content, I think that's the problem, is where those communities haven't, there's no conversation that's taking place.
So in a way, how can we get those people in the room, at least having that sort of desire to bring them into the room or into the Zoom, in this case? Okay, Margot, you got a point?
Well, I think this is the thing about, you know, who's not in a Zoom, and I think maybe that's kind of thinking back to what the function of the venues could be. I mean, you know, having community in your venue can provide you with all sorts of conversations that you would normally have. I mean, it feels sometimes like we're going over the same subjects, like, oh, why is it always the same group of people discussing the same things? And the answer is, like, we need to change something. And not everybody's going to be on Zoom, for sure. And not everybody's going to, you know, will be able to access everything all at you know, all at once when they want to, because of all sorts of barriers. But I think it's just about, you know, those venues and those different spaces. They need to be, you know, they need to be taking a role, in my opinion, of hosting those conversations, but not on their terms, in a way.
Okay.
So it's not about curating or dictating program. It's about the different approach, I think.
Yeah. Nobody wanted to pick up on this curating versus dictating question, but you know, that's up to you. This is your show.
I like that phrase, because I think, you know, as curators of work, or as artists filling in Arts Council applications, you know, you can sometimes get carried away and you do something to tick boxes. I know I've been there thinking, you know, am I making a show, or am I just ticking boxes now?
Are you just kind of constructing the show out of Arts Council requirements?
Absolutely, and I think that's really dangerous. So I think that needs to absolutely change. But, you know, in a way, are we ever going to be able to move away from those patterns that already exist? Like the Arts Council project grant is back on. Like, there's funding, but the BFI is going to be distributing it. It's like, well, okay, so no change then. All right, cool.
Well, I mean, we will see. We will see. We don't know at this point. I want to come to Simon, because you're talking about this venue of the future, or this, like, you know, reimagined venue. Does any of this kind of like add fuel to that sort of that discussion in terms of like accessibility? Is curation dictation this kind of thing, or who gets to decide what's there and how they access it?
It's very interesting. I can't, you know, it's a kind of slightly confidential project in the way it's working at the moment, but
well, just keep it abstract, you know, it doesn't have to be about
you know, what it is a local authority and an arts education service getting together and having a vision for a town that this will be a key part of their future high streets, where they've got some money, basically. And building the building's quite easy. That's not the point. It's building the organization and the purpose and the program. And then, you know, they've got a fantastic architect. The physical nature of access, I've had, you know, I've worked in refurbishing sort of listed concert halls in the past where I've worked, and things like that, you know, which were built without those features, and you try to sort of fit them in capital refurbishments. The chance, you know, starting literally from the ground upwards, the physical aspects of accessibility are not the problem, I think. You know, there is enough expertise and knowledge and a world-class architect on the project that isn't going to be the issue. The issue to me is the one that's right behind you on the screensaver that you have behind you, which is how we can respond to the needs of the communities. You know, it's how we remove those other barriers. How at this stage in the project, where there's an awful lot of well-intentioned people, most of them look exactly like me, but some of them haven't got beards, but they're all the same kind of age, they're all the same kind of color, sitting there desperately trying to kind of do the right thing, but saying, actually, you know, we don't want to dictate anything. And exactly that. And so you don't want a 19th century governance structure.
Yeah.
We need the voices.
Yeah.
And
I mean, so it's a kind of conceptual accessibility in a way, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's trying to convey that simply as someone who is engaged, you know, as an advisor to some people, where ultimately I have to write them a business plan that sort of where the numbers all stack up. So of course there's a focus on the economics and the ticket sales, even though it's got massive participation programs and all those kind of things. And of course, Arts Council have said from day one, you're not getting any money, but in 10 years time, they will give it some revenue funding, I suspect, because it will be brilliant. But there's no assumption of those things. What there is just an opportunity and a local political vision that sort of understands that this is really important and it will change their town, which is a fairly, you know, not the greatest place and an area of very low arts engagement and a very, very, very diverse community. And they're saying, right, let's build this on the high street. How do we make it work? How do we make it do all the things we want it to do socially, economically, and everything else? And, you know, and it's fascinating. And then this came along, you know, which sort of changed everything. But to me, you know, as another wise person said in another thing like this, you know, never let a good crisis go to waste. You know, this is the chance to drive change, you know. And, you know, I've worked in the past with a very large, you know, NPO outside of London, in the classical music sector, that amongst other things ran a professional symphony orchestra. I trust the quality of thinking in that organization and the ethics that I know that they will get money now, and I know that they will commission work from all kinds of people outside their organization over the next 6 months, because I know that that's where their hearts are at. Not everyone's are, but I know theirs are. And I know there will be some trickle down and some reach out. But will it ultimately, at the end of the day, change the organization so that those people who represent those kind of demographic tick boxes who they'll reach out to, in all warmth and humanity, but will they then become part of its governance structure, which necessarily is very time consuming and very voluntary?
Yeah, absolutely, which kind of links the whole conversation together and gives it a nice coherence. So thanks for that, Simon. I want to put it out to the other people that are listening, maybe, you know, people like Bablu, Guy, Harpreet, you've not said anything yet. We want to hear what you've got to say about these things. You know, there's so many questions here, and once again, I don't really like to talk about my opinions and stuff like that, but having done stuff for the National Theatre, you know that certainly this question about heart, it's not a question about an intention. I think it's more about the structure, because it is a wonderful and a diverse place to work. But, you know, how do we just change things around a little bit? Anyone that's not said anything yet? The people I've just mentioned, do you want to say anything? Anything from the chat, Will, on Facebook? Any points come in?
Yeah, we're having Simon's just going through. Yeah. I'm trying to collate quite a long thought. Yeah, he was saying that he's different. Simon's that was just speaking, by the way, for clarification. Was just saying that he's sort of looking and repurposing what he does at the moment, aimed around what his community needs right now. And we were discussing, he was saying that in the times to come, maybe Maslow's hierarchy of needs might look at what really we need to take into consideration, whether or not people's mental health is going to take precedence and how we can help support that. So he was mentioning a lot of different companies that you can work for involved with youth projects, but he's had to go out and source them himself instead of people actively posting those. And even difficult people that we might not have considered, like elderly people that are in sheltered housing right now, who aren't online, who can't even go downstairs, and how do we support those people right now? So yeah, it's sort of a lot of conversations following on from what we've had in previous weeks, but a big amount of praise to the youth clubs that are doing amazing work for the next generation of Hackney.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, we've been doing a lot of work with youth clubs as well, and it's not generally seen as part of a kind of culture offer, but, you know, actually, it's a huge connection between the young people and what culture's got to offer, and maybe that's as well another fertile area to explore. Margot.
Yeah, I think, with young people from, from all the kind of sessions that we've run, there's certainly, some young people that are not on Zoom. They're not really bothered by Zoom, but what it was really refreshing to hear. A lot of young people are getting involved in volunteering. So it is, maybe it's not volunteering on boards of important organizations, but it is volunteering for your community, and I think that's something we can certainly kind of learn from. But I think as adults, we're just too busy just doing, other things, kind of like, I don't know, having these discussions, for instance, but we're not there volunteering because we've got, funding bids to write or situations to sort out. And I think, looking to young people for some ideas and kind of looking at their needs and being responsive to what they need could be an interesting turn. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be doing quite an experimental session of working with young people on designing their own job in the future. We are inviting experts, but in a way, they're not allowed to be experts because we want to see whether we can disrupt this. Oh, this is how we do it. You should do it like this kind of approach, and see if it works. Whether we can genuinely have a conversation with young people and together create something that then can be implemented in workplaces. Because I really do think that different approaches need to start happening in our. Oh yeah, Arts Council. God, don't talk to me about that. We're just getting a bit too comfortable in our. In the selection of the subjects.
I have to say, it doesn't feel that comfortable. We might think it's comfortable, but I don't think it feels that comfortable, even if you are funded by the Arts Council, which I just want to point out, the People Speak is not funded by the Arts Council, but I feel like it's not actually that comfortable. Those organisations we work with that do, they're still struggling, and they're still trying to make stuff happen, I suppose.
I mean more about, the conversations that we're having. I mean, it feels like, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about funding or the Arts Council or whatever like that, but I'm just saying, these conversations, because, they tend to be, people just cover subjects they feel comfortable talking about, but the conversations that should be happening, I think we're still like a little bit shy about it and implement. It's like bringing the diverse board members onto our organization's boards. It's an important move, and it can really make a difference in how the conversation like we're having today could look like if people around this virtual table look differently. But so I think basically what I'm trying to say in summary is now is a good time to be having those uncomfortable conversations.
We could possibly, if you're up for it, Selma, and you've got the right to say no, but you're from Rich Mix, and we've been talking about how you've got a wonderfully diverse board. How does that make a difference to have that diverse set of people on the board? Is it still a problem that the way that it's structured, is it a bit too 19th century? You don't need to answer that if you don't want to, and I've got a feeling it's going to be left maybe for another. So maybe Judith, you could type something in there if you're still listening on Facebook about that. But how do we get that wider conversation? Is it just a question of like, in a way, giving up our seat, or will that never happen? I think Joanne, your view of it is that people, that have got the power, like to keep the power. So yeah, how is it going to change?
I mean, we've got a question here from Bablu who's listening. So hello, Bablu. I know that Bablu is very involved in grassroots projects here in Tower Hamlets. So as a man of many hats, he's currently working and listening to the conversation. It's probably not uncommon. But he's saying, interesting debate, and agree with what Simon has said, as it would be good to find out where this new fund is coming from and has come from and where it goes. So that's kind of linking back to the original conversation.
So
thank you, Bablu.
Okay. Feel free to jump onto the mic for a second just to say hello, just because I think I feel like, because you got involved in this last month, I feel like you would have something to say about this, and especially about this question about diversity. what are the benefits of having this more diverse board, and how do you get a more diverse group of people interact? Is it just about putting your feelers out into the youth clubs and community centres of your local area? Is there another way to do it? Margot?
I think in a way it is. I think in a way it is. It is about like putting yourself out there and jumping into a youth centre and just seeing what people are talking about, what's important to them. And I mean, I don't want to like keep plugging our events, but being outside on the street in Aberfeldy has certainly meant that we had a lot of different conversations and talking about meanwhile spaces. We're really thinking about that just in general terms, how we can use the spaces which are already here in the community, which are empty, and they will remain empty because a lot of people will lose their jobs and they will be struggling to pay rent, and there's a big development here happening next door, and what's going to happen with the future occupiers of these spaces. And I think that art has got a very important role to play for people's mental health. So again, I'm not saying anything new for sure, but I think now is the time to do it in a kind of yes, global connections, and listening to the bands from Bulgaria are great. And actually, I that's one of the highlights of lockdown and this whole pandemic, that I'm able to do that, and I'm able to make time because it's possible. It's acceptable to make time now to listen to something. You don't have to like physically and personally be in places to get the goosebumps, as you were saying, Simon. But it is about looking at things at a local level and breaking down barriers of people actually re-engaging with their communities, and particularly in London when everyone's from somewhere else. It's quite hard when you work, when your day revolves around getting to work, working, coming to work, shopping, children, family life. Like, we need to nearly learn how to connect with community. I know I'm learning, so there you go.
Okay.
That's a very...
It's a long speech. Maybe we'll just... Apparently the sound effects aren't working well, but we'll just do a... Just give you a little round of applause there.
I thought you were going to go for the cricket sound effect.
And you also got one from Bablu as well, a round of applause function, so that's good. So, all right, but where do we go from here? Where do we want to talk about? I just feel like, I mean, it is a bit like Talkaoke is what happens when you go free form. There is a danger of going round in a circle, but I feel that we've kind of done it here because it's the same problems. We're getting some new insights, and I think the thing about learning is, and I think that came from Judith, this idea that we actually are really learning. But I mean, where do we take this conversation to get these new insights to actually move forward? I mean, is it about this point of actually expanding and occupying spaces? There are going to be so much more empty space, maybe not in this very moment, but certainly in the future. We're seeing on our street units going empty and high streets being reimagined. I think that's something that Simon's talking about. Will the high street actually, I mean, that to me, that's an interesting area of, will the high street actually change and be for something different? Whereas people, where people favour online shopping over high street shopping, you've got these spaces in the centre of town.
But
yeah,
we've been talking to people who are, I don't know, maybe they're listening now, but we've been talking about people in Basildon who are reimagining their, the high street there. And I think it's interesting because it kind of links to what Mia was saying at the beginning of the session, which is about, art galleries becoming like shops for somebody's art, and some of it is inaccessible because of the price or other reasons. But I think what is now, potentially this is an opportunity. I think Richmond's being on a busy street as well, and with a back to Red Church Street, which is like, I don't know, it's like the shopping central. It's like the trendy station of London or something, but it's like, how do people think about what high street looks like? So it's, where you'd normally go and get whatever from on your high street. Maybe it's something else there now. Maybe it's just like a hangout space. I mean, I don't know, whatever. But
will the high street just become more of a hangout? I mean, we talked about that as well. It's something that Rosie brought up this space for people just to meet and actually hang out. And is that going to be something that needs to be facilitated a bit more? Will, you've got your hand up.
I do, yeah. I just thought Simon, who's holding down the fort on Facebook, actually, both Simon in the Zoom and out of the Zoom holds down
this
Facebook.
is a Simon-dominated conversation.
But
for better or for worse.
It was just a quote, actually, that I think told him quite nice. He said, we need art spaces and perhaps places like you're talking about, communal spaces to talk, to break down barriers more than ever. And we need places like this to think and make sense of what's happening, and also to overcome the societal effect of thinking we're all on our own. So maybe it's these spaces of breaking down those barriers and not realising that this isolation that's consuming everyone is an individual experience.
Well, we've talked a lot about barriers here, and we were starting to talk about this idea of a kind of conceptual barrier. And I think sometimes with a gallery or a shop or an art space, it's not actually, there is obviously if you're in a wheelchair, you've got to have a ramp or something like that. But sometimes the barrier is just purely, do I belong here? Can I walk through the door? What is this place for? And
a little bit like people's barrier coming onto the conversation here sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. There's certainly a barrier there. Who is this guy in the loud shirt? And is he going to have a go at me? There's all these questions that are, as I think Simon said, conceptual barriers. And how do we actually reduce that sense of barrier? I mean, I would certainly be interested in that. And it is, one of the things, we normally go with our round table. You should be able to see it here. This normally comes out onto the street. And then there's no barrier, and we can just invite people in. We can just suck them in with compelling questions.
In the middle of a shopping centre.
In a shopping centre, wherever. We can do this. But, these are questions about how do we actually, if we are going to repurpose these high streets, will the barriers still be there? Will people actually engage and involve themselves in these new spaces that are going to develop on the high street? Well, hopefully. I would like to see that, I have to say, as a thing, as a repurposing of the high street.
Yeah, I think it's happening, and it's going to have to happen. Something's going to have to happen. So I think it's up to us to make noise, whether we want the Heinekens of this world to sell whatever is being branded right now. I don't know, Heineken face masks.
They make a product that I appreciate, so I've not got that much.
Yeah, I had a lot of appreciation for Heineken, and then I tasted recently after drinking IPA. Don't appreciate so much anymore.
No.
So things do change. Even I changed from a lager to IPA, just in case anybody wanted to know this.
Is that down due to the lockdown, the change of taste, do you think?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. The tastes are changing all the time. See? A round of applause from Simon. Thank you, Simon. Okay. Are you applauding the Heineken? Are you not an IPA? Are you an IPA drinker?
Okay, well,
I will as well. There you go. So maybe we should change the discussion to what drinks should venues sell now, or give away for free. I don't know.
Well, maybe it's the fact that IPA goes better with sourdough, and that it's about a kind of spectrum of different tastes, because there are a lot of people who are on the kind of furlough sourdough kind of pathway at the moment, so that it could be something to do with that. Do you know what I mean?
Well, sourdough is the way to go.
Let me come to Will. Will, you've got a point?
Well, yeah, just tying into not from Facebook, but just want to throw out tying into the high street conversation. Somebody sent me a link, it was yesterday or the day before, I don't know the legitimacy of it, but a scheme contemplating whether or not to give people £500 in vouchers just to go and spend on the high street to re-inject into the economy. And what people's thoughts were on that, whether or not that's a good idea, a bad idea.
Would you spend it on Heineken?
Would I spend? No, not Heineken. Maybe IPA, not Heineken.
Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. Okay, so, in a way, it fits into what Stephen said about this kind of universal income. But, maybe that should be, instead of, like, products voucher, spend it on culture, says Simon. Maybe it could be a culture voucher.
Yeah,
and maybe that could be a way of kind of a different way of injecting money into the arts, that you can have a culture voucher. And so that's a good point there.
I think the culture voucher is very, it's a very good idea because, you know, if we show people options of the high streets, like what is on the high street, then their choices will be hopefully, you know, informed by the choice, you know, by what's already there. So if we as artists don't, you know, and cultural producers, if we don't occupy these spaces to show the money can be spent differently, then it's missing a trick, I think.
Okay, I mean, how will people, I mean, a culture voucher, this is a new sort of, I think this
is 500 quid, we can only blow it on something cultural. Go.
Yeah.
People, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean.
I do wonder what people would do.
Yeah, I mean, what do people think about this as a culture voucher? Could this work? Will, I'm going to come to Selma first, then I'm going to come to you. What do you think about a culture voucher, Selma? That might not be what you wanted to say.
No, I love the idea. I would be really pleased if it was specifically for culture, because even as a big cultural consumer and going, you know, putting a lot of money that way, I think if I just had a 500 quid voucher, I probably wouldn't use it very wisely.
No, what would you spend your 500 quid culture voucher on?
I think it should be, you know, I think it would need to come alongside a kind of artist support pledge type campaign, which I've been loving, and kind of, because I don't think that we know the breadth of what's out there. So some kind of campaign or some kind of way or platform, or a virtual high street where the artists have their shop fronts and then you can go shopping for but the other thing that made me think about was the DIY art fair of selling everything via Instagram stories, and you have your Instagram story stall on and then they share it. So I think it would need to come with some sort of platform. That's my that's how I'd like to spend my 500.
Okay, but you quite like the idea. I'm probably would spend that culture voucher in the Rich Mix bar or in other bars.
You're welcome.
That's just goes to show how uncultured I am. Hang on a second. But I quite like the idea of this culture voucher, even if you can't spend it on lagers. And I'm very much on the Heineken side of the Heineken IPA. Sorry, guys. Anyway, Kane, you've got your hand up. Culture voucher. Is it about that? Is it about something else?
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of everyone getting like a £500 voucher. I get it. How would we define culture in this? Like, clearly, Mikey, you've decided that beers in a bar, in a cultural venue, I'm guessing.
Yeah, fermentation is culture, surely.
Okay, I see where you've gone with that.
Yeah,
and I killed my sourdough culture.
Okay, your sourdough culture died.
He died, yeah.
Okay.
It's very sad.
It just goes to show that culture does need continual feeding and nurturing.
Every 8 hours.
Yeah.
It needs to be very well hydrated as well.
Okay. Well, there you go. Stephen, I want to come to you because you proposed this universal basic income, but what about the idea of a culture voucher so the artist doesn't get the money straight off, but they get the chance to actually have a culture voucher spent on them, or a few, hopefully. Could that work as a kind of grassroots way of funding the arts?
Yeah, I think as long as it could include being a participant as well as a consumer of arts, I think. So it sort of fulfilled the role of almost like an arts grant as well.
So you could sort of spend that 500 quid on workshops or something like that, or
run workshops, so I benefit.
Okay, so it could be for those running workshops. It could be. Sorry, a bit too loud. Sorry. Okay, so right, so we're talking about. We've suddenly got excited about the idea of a culture voucher. Stephen certainly has. He's dancing around the room. Simon. Go on.
I mean, and maybe we've just cracked the entire future of arts funding, where nothing is given to organisations and everyone is given to an individual, and they can spend it as they need, and then we'll know the culture that the people really want.
Yeah, but are we going to get? Is that? I mean, do you trust the people to come up with to be able to actually fund? interesting things?
If you'd asked me 10 years ago, before the rise of fascism in this country, whether I trusted the people, I'd have probably said yes, but I am a humanist who's currently really quite disappointed in humanity.
Okay, so there's some questions about whether we could trust people. What would the 50% of the people, not there's anything, I mean, I don't want to get into, where am I going to go with this? What would the 50% of people that voted to remain spend their money on? And what would the 50% that voted to leave? Not that I'm on any side on this. Yeah, I can come to you in a second, Margot. Will's got his hand up.
Not an answer to that question, though.
No, it was just a question that slipped out of my brain onto the Zoom that wasn't supposed to come out at all. So anyway, what's your question?
No, what I thought was interesting is actually Amsterdam has proposed something quite similar to this, because they were having an issue with people coming in and drinking and smoking, and it was having a real issue with the residents. So the University of Amsterdam has proposed that they move, well, it's essentially they're drinking and smoking to a sort of theme park area. Right. And to come to Amsterdam, you have to pay about €50 a day, but that €50 is reimbursable in cultural experiences. So you could use £10 to go to the museum or £10 to go to their art gallery, and that's the way they're trying to propose to shift their culture. So I wondered whether or not perhaps some sort of tourism approach and tying it in.
It is a kind of culture voucher that they're purchasing.
Yeah, it's not been approved yet, but it's been proposed.
It's a nice idea, yeah. Joanne.
Hello.
Hello.
I like that. I'm glad to hear that other idea, because personally, I think I think in general, if people have more money, they spend more money, and I wouldn't really want to see a restricted kind of way that people could spend their money on just culture. But I like that idea that it's a refund, so you pay a certain amount. Like the Amsterdam idea is really good, because that's sort of similar to where, if you you donate, you can get some money back on your taxes, stuff like that. Like there's different ways to incentivize people instead of restricting what they can spend money on.
Okay, I mean, if you had a £500 culture voucher, what would you spend it on? Was that too much of a difficult question?
I'm not sure. I would probably right now want to be giving to organizations that I don't want to see die.
I mean, I would probably, I think, spend it on fine art, because if it's something, it could be an emerging artist that could grow in value in the future, and then, I'll be loaded in the future. Margaret, you've had your hand up for ages. Simon's got his hand up. So I'm just going to come to Simon first, and I'll come to you.
So that's only a legacy of my hand being up from the last time, actually. I'm still trying to work out how to take it down again. So.
Okay, all right. Let me go straight to Margot then. What was your point?
My point was about, firstly, visual artists, they're renowned for not being very community-facing, so I wouldn't spend my culture voucher on visual art, anything. Although I do love visual art. But in terms of the culture voucher, I would activate it over time. So I would, so I wouldn't give it to people right away. I would just say maybe activate that in like 1 year time or 6 months time, when everybody got to the end of Netflix. And then just, and it will be for the art organizations and artists to use that time to, prepare the community to, to see the art and creativity served differently, and start effectively fighting for their attention, for people's attention. Okay. So then they can get the voucher donated to them, for instance.
I mean, we just had 1.6 billion donated to the art. How much is that, if you were to give every single person a voucher? Somebody do the maths. How much is that each? Someone's got to do the maths there. Maybe if there's any fundraisers in the room, maybe they...
Many people have calculators.
They might have a calculator. We're kind of only got 10 minutes left, so it is actually time for final thoughts. And this is the time where we, cajole and carouse people, even if they've not said anything, the whole session, to actually at least give us a final thought. So that's you, actually, Bablu, and maybe even you, Guy, if you fancy it. I don't want to be too on the case with it, but has anyone got a final thought for this session? Where do we go? How do we frame the next conversation? And if you were going to turn this huge donation to the arts into a culture voucher, how much would it be for each person? I'm going to do
Oh
it
my
myself.
God, no, Selma did it. It's
Oh,
quite
Selma
devastating,
done it
actually.
already. £24 each. Is that all? £24 each. Okay. Right. There's a lot of people in the UK. Okay, Kane, you got your hand up. Thanks for that.
I just done the maths.
Okay.
It's £23.55 each. So
okay.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not many round. I mean, what is
not
that?
Much,
That's
is it? It's not much, is it, per person?
It's like a creative Dominican.
Have you got a final thought now that you're live on Talkaoke?
Come back to me.
Come back to you. Will, we've got some, is it final thoughts from the...
No, it was from me, actually. Just £24 a person, if you think about that, if that's one person used that for one local community show, it could really shift what's popular in certain communities and enlighten a lot of people to art, actually, that £124. Not the massive venues, but the local smaller art centres can make a big impact.
I was getting excited about 500 quid, though, I have to say.
I mean, I can't you were getting excited about £500 of Heineken, but...
I mean, around where I live in Hackney, £24 will barely get you, like, we'll get you 4 Heinekens, probably. But they don't do Heineken, they do...
That's a year's supply in Birmingham, so we're all right.
Yeah. Okay. That's like 4 pints on Broadway Market. Okay. Kane, final thought.
Yeah, so with both the 1.57 billion that was announced the other day and also with the Arts Council emergency funding for national portfolio organisations, which is announced this week, I think there's a really big moment in terms of, do you pump all of that money into the really, really large institutions like the National, like the Royal Opera House, like the English National Opera, or do you try and do something that's more dispersed and that does focus on those smaller organisations, those more grassroots? And I think it will be interesting seeing what happens this week of how that will set the tone going forward.
Does it have to be an either or?
I don't, not necessarily, but them saying that the amount of money, you look at how much some of the, I think it's nearly 100 million that the Royal Opera House gets a year from the Arts Council. I might double check that, because that might be off by a quota of quite a big thing. I'll double check that. But that a very small number of organisations can potentially take a lot of the money.
Yeah. So they've got quite big sponges, some of these large institutions.
And then it does become an either or, I think.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So final thoughts. Anyone else got a final thought? Simon, I'm sure you've got one. Hang on. Yeah, go on.
Do I have a final thought? I have lots of thoughts. I was actually just off Googling how much the NPO funding is for the Royal Opera House, but I couldn't immediately find it. But I think we need to scrutinise the fairness of the distribution. I have some confidence, like I say, just from the signs that are out there, just as an interested person looking for things that are emerging, that when Mark David says he is confident that the Music Venue Trust representative grassroots organisations are going to get grants and not loans, then I slept a lot easier by sort of stalking his Facebook page that night until he kind of confirmed that was happening. I'm a bit of a journeyman in the arts over the last 30 years, working in venues that have had very, very different remits, and one of which outside of London is one of those, higher level tier 3 NPOs whose funding at one point was over £2 million before they started cutting, from Arts Council. I have a lot of faith in the integrity and the intent of those places. And certainly my job there over more than a decade was to kind of revolutionize it and be perhaps the token lefty who went in there. And by the time I left it was, it was very much coming from the right place, and it was, and we'd kind of reinvented its purpose. I might have been a Philistine in a Philharmonic, you know,
yeah.
When I first went in. But, you know, and I trust some organizations to do that absolutely right. And I do, but there won't be enough, you know, there simply won't be enough. You know, it doesn't take long to do the back of a fag packet maths and see what the sector deserves. Last night, I strolled along to a venue, an opera house where I also used to work, another one, because they'd lit it red, the technicians, in conjunction with the freelance, you know, with the freelancers and their suppliers, more as a statement about those people. And this was a campaign that ran across lots of venues throughout the country, and lots of people on the production side of the industry. Let's not forget them, the small businesses, you know. So a lot of lighting companies were involved, and they lit the framework of the pyramid stage at Glastonbury and all that kind of stuff, you know. And I went down there. I'm glad I did, because because I didn't see a board member, I didn't see their CEO. What I did see were technicians and audience members who are desperate for that place to open, you know, and that sort of sense of support that it needs to get that far. Whether you have the trust, goes back to that trust in that governance, that these people matter to them as well, as, you know, will vary on a case-by-case thing. I don't know that we have many better means of distribution, you know, and so, you know, I can be a huge critic, but I was impressed with how the first round of emergency response funding was distributed through Arts Council. We shall see. There won't be enough.
Yeah, absolutely. A great final thought. Thanks for that. And thanks for so much input today, Simon. For someone that came to listen, you've given a lot as well, so thanks very much. It's interesting. I mean, you know, we're starting to get creative with how funding could work. Maybe that creativity could also, you know, maybe the way out there hasn't been invented yet. Will, you've got your hand up. Is it a final thought? Is it final thoughts from the Facebook people?
Yeah, it is.
It
is from the another main contributor, Simon from Facebook, not Simon from Zoom, the other Simon today. He just wanted to say that these discussions are really valuable and very accessible. He came across the term collective sense making the other day, and it really speaks to him. So thanks for letting him share. Yeah,
it's a really nice one. And we'll give a hopefully that wasn't too loud this time. Okay, so any final thoughts? I mean, you know, I feel like we have got somewhere. You know, I thought for a minute we were kind of like, well, how is this going to work? You know, what are we actually doing here? What's the point of culture anyway? And then we kind of broke out and started getting excited about, in a way, the economics of the whole system. Any final thoughts, Margot? You got a final thought there?
It's probably not a final thought.
No, well, it never is.
It never is. No, but I'm just interested in, you know, the £500 kind of tourism vouchers versus culture vouchers. I think that it's an interesting way of prioritizing. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say. But I thought today was really, really good. A lot of really new kind of conversations, and I'm glad the Facebook was kind of was live as well. And we do have some events coming up which I can talk about very shortly. But yeah, that was my final thought.
Okay, well, let's just we'll just kind of do, you know, we'll do the events coming up very, very shortly, but let's just give everyone the opportunity for a final thought, including those who've not said anything yet. Now's your final chance to speak. And Stephen, Joanne, Selma, we haven't had a final thought from you yet. So now's your chance. It's always good to get that. Yeah. Selma, yes. Welcome, Selma.
Hey, I'm jumping at it. Final thought. I thought this is a really good continuation of our discussions. For me personally, it's about using this time as an opportunity and making sure that we're not, that we're being as inclusive as possible and embedding, access and representation throughout everything, but also how we can repurpose our spaces to be more of a community resource. But also loved the chat about the cultural voucher. So if somebody wants to organise that and give me one, it'd be great.
So if somebody wants to organise that, I'm down, you're down, we're all down with the culture voucher idea. Okay, any other final thoughts from people? It's been great to hear from you. This is your final chance for a final thought, people. Last chance. We're over the time now, so oh, Stephen, yes. Oh no, that's just a bye-bye. Okay, but don't go yet because we've got to plug our gigs. We've got to plug our gigs. So, Margot, tell us what's coming up next.
So we've been talking about the fundraising a bit, and actually on 23rd of July at 5 p.m. we are having a Talkaoke, which is on reimagining organizations during lockdown, and that's organized by the Institute of Fundraising.
Yeah, I just want to say to that, it is organised by the Institute of Fundraising, but one of the things we really need is artists and cultural practitioners, people running venues that are not fundraisers, but need funds to come in, get involved in that conversation. So that's absolutely really crucial. Guys, if you want to join in, and that includes people on Facebook, because that one will also be on Facebook, yeah, do join into that one because they're having these same discussions really, but from a different perspective.
Yeah, so if you always got angry in the corner about the funding, just come and join a conversation.
And you've
we'll
got some
try
people
to make
get
it
angry about as well. Yeah,
we've got this the sound effects, so hopefully it won't be too harsh participation.
Yeah, we'll do a little bit of technical work to do on the. Sorry about the sound effects, not getting that quite right today.
And then the upcoming, after that, on the 28th of July and then on 5th of August, we're doing 2 sessions on designing your own job at East Summer School, which is organised by, well, it normally would take place in Queen Elizabeth's Olympic Park, but it's going to take part on. It's going to happen online. So you're welcome to
You've got
send
a slide
any.
for that?
Hopefully.
No, we don't have a slide for that. Okay, yeah.
So this is coming up on the 28th of July and 5th of August, and then of course we've got our informal Aberfeldy Live session. There's going to be a third one using a hybrid approach of online offline on the 30th of July, and then we're going to be working with Spotlight Youth Centre on the 4th of July. But I will, 4th of August. I'm just going to leave the link here in the chat so you can have a look at our upcoming events. And sign up to our mailing list, which is very infrequent and very irregular, you'll be relieved to know. So we can keep you in the loop. But yes.
Absolutely, and that you know, these events, the Aberfeldy Live is really developing into something that's really kind of unique and special, and it's just got such an energy to it, where you combine the online and the offline one. So that's really one I'd recommend to everybody out there. So that's it. Thanks everyone for joining. Let's try the round of applause and hope it does not too noisy. Thank you everyone for taking part. We will be back, so it tends to be, is it the first Tuesday of the month? I think that's what it is. We see Guy there in bed. I hope you're not feeling too bad, but you're just lying in bed, but thanks for getting involved. We can carry this conversation on the chat on Facebook. With the Zoom is going to be closed shortly. Thanks. It's been lovely to hear from all of you here today. It's been a great conversation. So we'll see you soon.
See you later,
thanks
everyone.
to Rick for the visuals and all the knobs and buttons. And thanks to Margot and Will for reading the chat. And thanks everybody for taking part in this conversation.
And a quick thank you from Judith, who connected on Facebook. So she's been listening. So thank you everybody from Rich Mix as well.
Okay, good stuff.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.